Now, when we go through this, we're also trying to make sure you hit all the elements of the Constitution you need, not just for your state test, but for your college knowledge. So that becomes kind of paramount. And so we're going to try to make sure that we cover all the bases as we go through. Now, the last time we talked, where we left off, was with this idea of populism. Okay. Now, how many of our presidents are true populists, right? Maybe three. I'm kind of throwing in Teddy Roosevelt there, especially in his second reincarnation when he tried to run again. We'll talk more about him later. But the truth of the matter is, it's not a common occurrence in America. The system doesn't really lend itself to that. So it's very rare. Now, there have been populist candidates like William Jennings Bryan, and you guys all know Bernie Sanders, but they usually don't make the presidency, right? There's something about being very much behind a certain position and being very adamant that kind of turns Americans off sometimes. Americans like to go more toward the middle, less controversy. But that's not what happened with Andrew Jackson. That's certainly not what happened with Donald J. Trump, those two. And Teddy Roosevelt, I got to throw him in there. And we'll talk more about him later. But a populist, again, is somebody who represents the people. Now, Jackson never had polls. He couldn't go out and ask and talk to all the people. What do you really want? He just had a sense of it. And his sense of it, that he was the representative of the people and he knew what was best, right? And I think we just saw that in the last president. I mean, he had an advantage of modern polling and whatever, and he can identify his base and know what his base wants and what the triggers are. So there's more tools today, surveying, that kind of thing, for a candidate like Donald J. Trump to tune in to his audience, who's listening to him. And then his rallies, of course, really gave him all sorts of support. But when we compare Jackson to Trump, we realize that when they became president, and even throughout their lives, they're very, very different people in fundamental ways. For example, who was the only president to ever pay the national debt down to zero? Did President Trump all the way promise to in the campaign? Did he even get close to that? Quite the opposite. He ran up trillions of dollars in debt. President Trump would lose more jobs in 1 year than any president in American history. The economy would tank faster in 1 year than any other time in American history, going back to Herbert Hoover, who another president we need to talk about. But there's another difference too. Andrew Jackson was a major league war hero. The general that beat the British at the Battle of New Orleans, even though he was outnumbered. He was always on the frontier fighting throughout his years. He was legitimately the real deal military leader. John McCain, on the other hand, was also that way. John McCain, who would go on to run for president, very famous senator from Arizona. During the Vietnam War, his father was the admiral of the 7th Fleet, head admiral. His grandfather was a major league admiral and war hero in World War II. So he literally came from Navy royalty, and he was a Navy pilot. Well, he was given many missions over Vietnam, North Vietnam, and he got shot down. Landed in a lake. Basically, his body completely shattered in that crash. And then he was drug out of the lake, beaten, tortured, and for 7.5 years spent his time in an infamous prison, which the soldiers, the captives there, called the Hanoi Hilton. If you've ever been to Hilton, you know it's supposed to be a top quality resort, right? But this is just, that was sarcasm. And literally, he was tortured so badly at one point, hung up by the ceiling like this behind with his arms held up high, that he literally the rest of his life could not lift his arms past here. People would wonder, how come you don't salute, or how, when there's troops, how come you don't, when you get your hand or your heart? It's about all he could do, because he couldn't physically do that anymore. Now, John McCain became a major league war hero in this moment, because the North Vietnamese, looking for any propaganda value that they could get, realized that they had a high value captive, that his father was the person on deck on the US Navy 7th Fleet patrolling the shores around Vietnam. So they offered to let him go as an act of charity, kindness. John McCain was given the chance to leave, and he refused to go. He said, until every other pilot that's here, every other soldier that's here, until they're released first, I will not leave. At that moment, he became legend in the US military. He was eventually released. There he is on crutches, barely able to walk, coming off the plane, meeting the president then, which was Richard Nixon, shaking his hand. And he goes to Arizona and runs for Congress and then Senate, and became one of the most influential and important senators in modern time. He was known kind of as a maverick person. He was a person who would challenge even his own party if he thought something was right or wrong. Arizona loved him. His wife, Cindy McCain, is kind of important. She actually owns the Budweiser beer franchise for Arizona. So she's worth a lot, ton of money. But he was much more of a humble kind of, living person and that, and they meshed really well. And he goes back to DC, and then he gets the nomination for the Republican Party for president of the United States after, the tumultuous presidency of George W. Bush, the Republican, and ran against Barack Obama in 2008. Now, John McCain really didn't have a chance in that election because the economy had crashed under George H.W. Bush, and people were kind of fed up with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as a result, he would lose because the economy, once again, like in your time, was crashing, right? And we were losing 100,000, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800,000 jobs a month at that crucial time. We call that period the Great Recession. And John McCain admitted, I'm not the economic guy. I'll have to find somebody to do that. Barack Obama, of course, seized on the moment. Remember, it's the economy, what? Yeah, that was an earlier election, but it applied here, and he focused like a laser beam on the economy. And as a result, it wasn't really a close election at all, but it was a good election. It was one of those elections which I really like. What I like is an election where you get two quality candidates picked in the primaries by the political parties. The job of the political parties, now listen very carefully, is to pick good candidates. Because to be honest with you, most Americans show up on election day and they only have a choice between two people, right? So the parties need to pick the most quality person they can on both sides. And I think another election that I liked a lot was the next one, right? 2008, we go to 2012. It was Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama. Look, either way, the country went, whether it was John McCain, Obama, or Obama, Romney, we were going to be okay. There's no doubt in my mind that Mitt Romney would have been a great president. I know John McCain would have been a good president. I don't think there's any question on that. But by the same token, Obama fit the time, fit the moment, and he won pretty decisively, frankly. Okay, now, John McCain is like, well, Andrew Jackson. It was his military career that launched his political career. Donald J. Trump during this time? Well, there was a way to get out of the draft to go to Vietnam. And especially if you had a lot of money, he had a doctor sign a note that said he had bone spurs, so he couldn't, go through the basic training and all that. And here he is playing basketball. He played golf all the time when he went to college, whatever. Okay. He likes to say, I had military training. He went to a high school military academy because his parents were having trouble with him, and they sent him there to school, but he never went to an actual military academy. It was the high school. And then he went to college and got 5 deferments. That meant, oh, I can't go right now because I'm in college, and 5 determinants. 5 times he avoided the draft, never went, never served, not a day in the military. Once said, quite famously, you can go look it up. It's in one of Woodward's books, that you had to be some sort of, well, It's not very, it's so negative. I won't even try to paraphrase it, but if you want to make a lot of money, you don't go in the military. And why would you not want to make a lot of money? So that's another big difference between Andrew Jackson and Donald J. Trump. And we could go on and talk about more of those as we go through it. But by the same token, what we have in Donald J. Trump is somebody who can campaign negatively. His negative campaigning, and the reason I talk about John McCain is because when he's being asked about his military service, the lack thereof, and John McCain is not liking the way the primary is working, that they're not going to get to that candidate that he would prefer. And John McCain was establishment by this time, no doubt about it. He lashes out at John McCain in one of the weirdest outbursts of the primary season. Here we go.
Good evening. We start tonight with Donald Trump, the GOP presidential contender's latest remarks in Iowa about Senator John McCain's military record have landed Trump in the political crosshairs. Trump saying McCain is not a war hero. So far, Trump's political campaign operates with a no apology, no guts, no glory approach. He announced his presidential ambitions with what some consider incendiary rhetoric on immigration. That blunt style now has the billionaire business mogul in certain polls the GOP frontrunner. But will insulting John McCain's Vietnam record help or hurt Trump? We're covering this tonight with NBC's Kelly O'Donnell on the campaign trail and our Chuck Todd in Washington, D.C. We begin in Ames, Iowa. Kelly, good evening.
Good evening, Thomas. This is a day-long event bringing together about 3,000 conservatives who've come out to hear from 10 of the Republican presidential campaign candidates. And then something unexpected and outrageous flew out of the mouth of Donald Trump. And now the whole GOP race is feeling the turmoil. On stage in Ames, Iowa, Donald Trump speaks from
Iowa? Keep your eyes on Iowa always.
First, think later bravado was on full blast, aimed at Senator John McCain.
He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. 5.5 years. He's a war hero because he was captured.
That stunning statement followed a simple question from pollster Frank Luntz, who asked if Trump's frequent criticism of McCain made him appear less than presidential.
He's a war hero because he was captured. Okay? You can have, and I believe perhaps he's a war hero.
Twitter lit up as other Republican candidates denounced Trump. Jeb Bush, enough with the slanderous attacks. Rick Perry declared Trump unfit to be commander-in-chief, while Scott Walker ignored Trump but called McCain an American hero. Mike Huckabee today.
Donald Trump will need to determine whether that's a statement he would want back.
Trump, facing off with reporters, tried to soften his remarks.
I'm not blaming John McCain. Apologize to McCain? No, not at all.
69-year-old Trump, who did not serve in the military, said student deferments and a foot problem kept him out of Vietnam.
Which foot did he have the bone spur in?
You'll look it up in the records. I know it's in the records.
Today's outburst began after Trump lit a fuse over illegal immigration. When Trump visited McCain's home state of Arizona, the senator accused him of hurting the GOP by bringing out the, quote, crazies.
He called them a bunch of crazies. That was an amazing crowd of people. Those were great Americans at that event.
Tonight, Senator John McCain is not commenting publicly. His daughter Megan tweeted that she was horrified and disgusted by Trump's remarks. And Ted Cruz, also a candidate who has been publicly supportive of Donald Trump up until today, said that both Trump and McCain are friends, so he tried to stay out of it. And Trump is, of course, enjoying the attention. Thomas?
Kelly O'Donnell reporting in Iowa for us. Kelly, thank you. And
Okay, now, what was the strategy there?
Attention.
Was there a strategy there? Attention? What's the strategy?
They should have been like,
What's that?
all attention is good attention.
Interesting comment. I don't know what the strategy was there, to be honest with you. I don't. I think maybe he just blurted it out and then got caught in its cycle. I don't know. We'll never know. But what we do know is John McCain, who got the nomination to run for president of the Republican Party, who is as establishment as you can get, would have this long running feud with John McCain, Trump would, that would keep going well beyond this first interaction. And of course, you know that Mr. Trump then goes on to take second place in Iowa and astonishes the field. And all these other candidates, you know, are thinking, oh, this will do him in. But what you should know is this: be careful what you say, but listen very carefully. In his reelection, Cindy McCain, avid supporter of Republican candidates her whole life, supported the Democrat Joe Biden in the state of Arizona. And Arizona, for the first time since the 1950s, voted for a Democrat and elected 2 Democratic senators. This incident would have long-term negative consequences, and the feud would continue to go on. But it may have cost Trump re-election in the fact that he lost Arizona, because for Arizonans, they have what we call a favorite son mentality. They're conservative, yes, but a different sort of conservatism than you'll see in the South, in the deep South. It's kind of like Utah conservatism, very independent minded, whatever, has a different flavor to it. And also, it's kind of the beginning place. It's the place in American history where the modern Reagan conservative movement began, with another maverick senator by the name of Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater ran for president too, back in 1964. He got trounced. It was, I should show you the map. I mean, it was one of the biggest landslides in history. However, he did plant the seeds that would later grow into the Reagan presidency. In fact, if anything, he was the economic guidepost for a future Ronald Reagan, who campaigned for him. Someday we'll maybe show you those. But what we're seeing here, everyone, is negative campaigning. Does negative campaigning work? Raise your hand if you think it works. How many think a positive approach would be better? Guess what? Negative campaigning works. It's more effective than positive campaigning. Again and again and again, people say, I hate the negative ads. I hate the negative campaigning. I hate the negative this, that. And yet, as we learned from Facebook, who's in the hot seat again today, as you know, anger and controversy gets more clicks. More people turn in to see a street fight than turn in to see everything just going lovely on the street and the flowers blooming and the park looking beautiful. But if there's a crash or there's a fight, everybody's tuning in. Negative campaigning works. And in this case, we have someone who is using it very effectively. And when gets attacked by a fellow Republican, which, you know, was common. I mean, Jeb Bush is attacking him and all this kind of stuff. He takes him on. Let me show you perhaps, though, that this is nothing new. When you look at the long history of American politics, the ugliest elections of all time was probably 1800. Ooh, that was an ugly one. Oh, 1824, 1828. Whoa. 1860, Lincoln. Oh my goodness. These were campaigns that were down and kind of vicious at times, quite frankly. We'll talk about some of that maybe if we get time. The fascinating elections. But the one where I think we saw the most negative campaign ad of all time was 1964. We had a vice president for John Kennedy, who took over when Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who would create some of the most massive pieces of legislation in American history. But he was, well, a campaign brawler. And he put this ad out. It's called the Daisy ad. It's absolutely infamous. So for those of you who are maybe not focused right now, I think you'll want to watch this. It's 30 seconds of your life that it will shock you. Here we go. This is 1964, an ad produced by LBJ against Barry Goldwater of Arizona. So here we go.
Three, four, five, 7, are the stakes? To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson.
What? French New Wave,
Exactly. What
Michelle.
just happened? Listen carefully. This is something that the former president was a master of doing. Defining your opponent before your opponent can define themselves to the voters. Also, too, if you want to get the Republican base that lost 2 elections back to back to President Obama, go after Obama. If the front runner is Jeb Bush, you define Jeb Bush before voters can really get a handle on what kind of person he is and his skills and his talents and his abilities. It's a well-known strategy. Define your opponent before they define you. And we're going to see how that plays out very successfully during this campaign that Donald J. Trump will wage to win the nomination for the Republican Party, starting, of course, in Iowa. Now, if you have a big critic now, like a John McCain, an elder statesman of the party, frankly, it got vicious. There's no doubt about it. I don't know whether it was as vicious as this, because Lyndon Johnson was able to convince everyone that Barry Goldwater was a warmonger. That means love war. And if you elected him, it would mean the nuclear end of the human race. This lad was so notorious that it was only shown a few times before it was roundly criticized and it was pulled. But by the same token, it had already had its effect. And they did some follow-up ads, because once you label your opponent a warmonger, for example, in the case of in the case of Goldwater and Johnson, then you follow it up with other ads. And I should show you the cesium ad. Probably should find it right now. Let's see if I can. But let's see if there's any logic to this at all. This ad worked.
On November 3rd, the stakes are too high for you to stay home.
I mean, why? This is so gratuitous. It's just like,
What goes from 0 to 10?
the focus on the eye, and then all of a sudden,
I've seen this movie like French.
These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
now, that's one reason it works so much is you got to remember the paranoia we had in the Cold War, because we were actually, learning to duck and cover, and we had every school had civil defense capability underneath the school with supplies and food in case nuclear war broke out. We also had this incident called the Cuban Missile Crisis, where literally for 14 days, we just didn't know whether Russia and the United States were going to start launching nuclear missiles at each other. Now, listen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of maybe pause this for a second. I'm going to pause the recording. So they didn't run that ad again, but they managed to run, I think, an ad that's even more effective to reinforce the message that you can't trust Goldwater with the nuclear button. And it's called the ice cream ad. Here we go.
Freaking car.
Shh. Can I ask you to tone it down a little bit? Okay, because you're just interrupting, so just kind of relax. Okay, so here we go.
Do you know what people used to do? They used to explode atomic bombs in the air. Now, children should have lots of vitamin A and calcium. But they shouldn't have any strontium-90 or cesium-137. These things come from atomic bombs, and they're radioactive. They can make you die. Do you know what people finally did? They got together and signed a nuclear test ban treaty, and then the radioactive poison started to go away. But now, there's a man who wants to be president of the United States, and he doesn't like this treaty. He fought against it. He even voted against it. He wants to go on testing more bombs. His name is Barry Goldwater, and if he's elected, they might start testing all over again.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
Now that ad reinforces the first one and also reinforces that you can't trust Goldwater with the nuclear button. Okay, now here's the thing though. We were testing nuclear weapons right out here in Nevada all the way through the 1950s. And all that radiation went right toward Utah, right toward, well, people as far as Canada got the radiation, but it caused cancers like you would not believe through the Utah community. They're called downwinders. I had a friend of mine who died of this. He grew up in Payson. And in those days, you know, you milk the cows right there. And so all the dairy was local. And so the cows were eating all of this and it was covered with this white powder and whatever. They grew up with this radiation concentrated in the milk, and he suffered from cancers his whole life, eventually passed away from it. This was a real deal, that they would wait until the winds were blowing away from Los Angeles toward us before they to detonate these bombs in the open atmosphere. And my generation, right, we all have cesium in our body right now. You can actually date somebody, their bones. If they're of a certain age, you know how old they are by these radioactive elements in our bodies. You don't have those because you haven't been exposed. This was a real thing. And the accomplishment, of course, was a big one that everybody was happy about. And that was with Russia and the United States. Kennedy started this negotiation. Johnson finished it, and they managed to have a test ban treaty that we no longer blow up nuclear weapons in the open atmosphere. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but we never detonated, I don't think, anything over 10 megatons. The Soviet Union did a 50 megaton and was planning a 100 megaton, and those are too big. I mean, it's like a massive, massive earthquake that shakes through the planet. It's just, it vaporizes the whole area in Siberia where they did this, and it's basically creates an uninhabitable area. It was like really getting out of control. And so this was one of the great achievements of the age to stop this test ban treaty on both sides. And he's reflecting on that, but he's also saying, don't trust Goldwater. My point in showing you that is if we had negative campaigning in the past, and the strategy is define your opponent before they can define you. And if you can get everybody thinking that your opponent, Jeb Bush, is, and here was the line he used, I'm talking about Trump against Jeb Bush, low energy Bush, low energy Bush, low energy Bush, saying it over and over and over again, like he has no energy to be president. So he can't be president. It works. You say it enough, a lot of people believe it. Now, the other person that he took on, of course, was President Obama. We talked about, what's the controversy about his birth certificate called? What's the term for it? What do we call it in history? It'll always be called the what controversy? Yes. No, the conflict around his birth certificate, what's it called? What's the ism? Oh, I see you missed it yesterday. Okay. Birtherism. Birtherism is a thing. It's in the history books. It's basically the conspiracy theory that the president of the United States, elected twice, is not a legitimate citizen of the United States and therefore is ineligible to be president. Okay. Now, the Constitution is delightfully vague on what it means to be a natural born citizen, 35 years old and 14 years of residence. We covered. This is all that's said in the Constitution about qualifications to become president. We know that the reason that you had to be 14 years a resident. And this vague term at the time, even natural born citizen. We know Hamilton was born in the Caribbean, but he qualified because he was here when the Constitution went into effect. That the whole point of it was to keep some foreign prince or leader from just getting a boat, coming over here, being charismatic, and becoming president. We actually had a guy that was like that. His name was Gonnet. He was a French minister, and he became one of the most popular people in the country in terms of politics, and tried to get the United States, right, to get involved with the French against the British in a war that they were fighting, called the Gonnet Affair. It was during Washington's administration. So the idea, it was actually possible. So that was the point of it. But today, it's delightfully vague. Trump was a birther. And we played the clip yesterday, did we not, where he did the interview and talking about, it's, yes, it's a birth certificate, but it's not the right kind of birth certificate. And he goes on and on and on and on. Well, eventually, the state of Hawaii, to end the controversy, at the request of President Obama, released what they call the long form version. In other words, they have a short one that they just send to you for your driver's license, passport, and all this kind of stuff. You need your birth certificates. You all know where your birth certificates are? Okay.
Yeah.
Do y'all know how to get a replacement one? Just write your county. It's a piece of cake. You know, I've had to do it several times because I keep those in mind, but you can get those. But the point is, they're really important to have because, you know, good luck getting a passport without it. Good luck getting a driver's license without it. You'll need that passport. Voting, you got to have this birth certificate. But there is a long form with more detail in it. It's signed by the representatives of the state and whatever. And that was finally released because this controversy got so big. Now, once it was proven that President Obama, who was born in Hawaii, you know, did have this long form certificate, Trump doesn't say, oh, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. He takes credit for ending the very controversy that he started. So it was quite an interesting response once the long form was released. So let's go ahead and play that.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Tonight, a conversation with Donald Trump that turns a bit contentious. At issue, his role in stoking the so-called birther debate and his self-congratulatory tone today after President Obama did a major about-face and released a birth certificate he had refused to make public for more than 2 years. Here it is, right here. And yes, it's the long form. Yes, it shows the president was born in Hawaii, August 4th, 1961, 7:24 p.m. If you care about such things, constitutionally qualified to be president. End of story. And we hope, end of conspiracy theories. It was, though, for the president, a remarkable change of heart and strategy. One the president says he decided to take after watching, in his view, the so-called birther debate drown out serious coverage of the giant issues facing the country, including the economy, deficit reduction, and high gas prices.
We're not going to be able to do it if we just make stuff up and pretend that facts are not facts. We're not going to be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
In a moment, the reasons for the big White House strategy shift. But first, Mr. Trump, the man the president had in mind when he talked of sideshows and carnival barkers. Mr. Trump is here in New Hampshire today, introducing himself to Republican leaders and voters, saying he expects to formally enter the 2012 presidential race in June. Now, self-promotion is a Trump trademark. And when he landed here this morning, he was beaming.
Today, I'm very proud of myself because I've accomplished something that nobody else has been able to accomplish. I was just informed while on the helicopter that our president has finally released a birth certificate.
Mr. Trump mixed bragging with a bit of revisionist history, suggesting it was us in the news media somehow forcing him to question whether President Obama was born here in the United States.
We can get on to issues, and hopefully when I sit down with interviews, people don't start talking about birth certificate like they've been doing. So I feel I've accomplished something really, really important, and I'm honored by it.
Whoa. Oh, that was an interesting twist, right? You didn't see that coming. the truth is, did it get him on the map? Was everybody focused attention on him, right? And it was a great strategy, frankly. Now, where's the certificate? It also, for the first time in my career, made this part of the unit matter. So yeah.